I think for me, the biggest challenge that we face is the climate and ecological emergency, which I always say to people, if you're not regularly terrified about it, you're not paying attention, and you really need to understand what's actually occurring. We're recording this during the summer, which has smashed records around the world and across Europe. We had over 41 degrees in the UK, which is completely unprecedented. 100 towns in France ran out of water. And the reality is that unless we see rapid and concerted global action, in 10 years' time we'll look back on this as being one of the cool summers. And we're not ready for it at all. And it's something where, when COP26 happened in Glasgow, governments were saying, well, all of these things we've done would keep global temperature below 2.4 degrees, as if that was some kind of a result. Actually, we're only at 1.2 degrees now, and we're seeing people in Pakistan and Iran seeing temperatures of over 50 degrees. Human beings can't function at 50 degrees. And I think already this winter we're going to see quite an impact on food system. The interrelatedness of this is really important, because when the rivers fall low, then the hydro energy generation doesn't work. So then there's not electricity to make the minerals that we need and to produce the food. It's all so connected, and we lose that. So for me, the climate emergency. The climate scientists tell us we need to get down to close to zero carbon emissions within the next 10 years. That's huge, 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 huge thing. And I think alongside the climate and ecological emergency, the thing that troubles me the most is the thinking that actually we have, that it is accompanied by a crisis of the imagination. It's accompanied by a failure of our collective imagination, where it's a situation that demands that we reimagine everything and rebuild everything. And we can't reimagine it because our collective imagination, which should be a muscle like this, has become a muscle like this. So we need to also look at how do we create the best conditions, what I call an imagination infrastructure. How do we build an imagination infrastructure so that we can really, firstly, imagine and design the ways that we move forward. But secondly, and maybe most importantly, feel really excited by this as a possibility. Because if we do everything that the climate scientists tell us we need to do, these next 10 years could be like we lived through a revolution of the imagination, the most extraordinary time in history where we reimagined and rebuilt everything. I want to live through a time like that. I want my kids to live through a time like that. It would be exhilarating. And so I think those two things go alongside each other for me. I wouldn't say that it's the main problem, but I think it's a very, very big problem, because, accompanied by that is maybe the other part of the problem is that we are governed by people with no imagination at all. And so as this crisis becomes more and more obvious and frightening and clear, we are governed by people whose only solution is to just keep doing more of what they were doing before, because they can't imagine doing anything else. So rather than the obvious thing, which is that we need to create have a massive push for renewable energy, the majority of that being in community ownership, we need to break up the big energy companies, create local regional energy companies that we invest money in locally, that the government supports, that we need to reimagine our food system so that it is much less dependent on fossil fuel inputs and chemicals. We need more people working in a different form of agriculture. It's just, they just play around a little bit. We'll change this and change this piece of law, and that does not appropriate anymore. The Institute for the Future in America, they have this beautiful expression. They say any idea about the future should at first seem ridiculous. And I feel like anyone now who brings ideas forward about what we do that initially doesn't appear ridiculous, it's not ambitious enough. I think when we look at how to rebuild imagination, one of the first things is we have to recognize imagination needs space, right? We all know in our lives our best ideas come when we have some space. Albert Einstein said his best ideas came when he rode his bicycle in the forest. J.K. Rowling imagined the whole Harry Potter story in one long train journey from Glasgow to London. We need space. And in our society today, everyone is working so fast. Organizations are so busy. People are so stressed. In an organization, in a company, in a government department, you have to make space for people to have these conversations. How is France going to move away from being dependent on cars for everything if there isn't a space created within government and the Department of Transport to have that conversation? So we have to create space. We have to have a government telling a consistent story. You can't say, yes, climate change is a big, really, really serious problem. We have to do things, and we're going to build a new airport, and we're going to build some new roads over here, and we're going to carry on using coal. You have to be consistent all the way through. We need to be telling better stories about how the future could turn out. I think we need to. I love the story in Bologna, in Italy, where the municipality created a civic imagination office in the city. They could see the involvement in democracy and participation was declining, so they created a civic imagination office with 6 laboratories around the city to invite people to come together and dream together. And then the brilliant bit was that when people came up with a good idea, the municipality said, good idea, let's make it happen. We'll do this, this, and this. Let's make a pact. And they make pacts to make them happen. So we have to invite ideas, create the space for imagining, and then go and do it. And that's maybe the most important part. I think one of the best ways to create space in a society is through a universal basic income or a variation on a universal. There are various different models for that. A society guarantees its citizens a basic level, and it removes the precariousness that so many people are experiencing. And also this idea of universal basic services, that we all have access to good healthcare for free. We have access to good transport for free. We have access to good schools. That's the minimum that we do as a society. So we need to. That's really one way to create space. Maybe a 4-day working week. Also, as communities, it's really important that we create what I call what-if spaces. So spaces that are really well facilitated for the community to come together to really expand its dreaming about where we could go from here. That's really, really important. And there are loads of great examples of that in the transition movement and other movements, citizens' assemblies, people's assemblies, these kind of things where people can come together and come up with new ideas themselves. Yeah, I think imagination, of course, we have imaginative lives ourselves. We can be imaginative on our own, but it's really something that comes into its own when we do it with other people. That kind of radical imagination needs to spark off other people and other people's experiences. It's also what allows us to be more compassionate, more empathic, because imagination is what allows you to walk in other people's shoes and to really understand other people's experience, which allows us to move towards deliberation. We can debate with each other, explore ideas together. But yeah, imagination really is something that we do together. But in order to make that happen, it needs good facilitation, it needs good design, it needs good events where we can do that together. Our activism needs play. We have to play more as activists, I think. I feel like in 2022 we have designed maybe the worst education system we could have for the times that we're in. What are the skills that we need in 2022 in order to find a way through the climate emergency? We need young people who feel empowered, who feel like they can change things, who feel like they have a living practice and experience of what democracy actually looks like, who are able to not just solve a problem that has one single solution, but who are able to think their way around problems in ways where they really use their creativity and their imagination. We need young people who are able to sustain their attention on something for more than 8 or 9 seconds. 2 of my kids went to a democratic school where the kids had the power to hire teachers, to fire teachers, to change school rules, but they had to learn how to do it first. They had to learn how to practice democracy as a daily thing, and it was such a powerful thing for them as they become adults. I think schools should really be a showcase of a low carbon future. They should be surrounded by food gardens. They should generate more energy than they use. They should be, so every day you go to school is like stepping forward into the future. I went to Montsortu near Nice, where the municipality there grows 70% of all the food for the schools in the town on land that they bought around the town. And it changed the food culture in the school. All the food is prepared fresh. It led to a whole culture shift among the parents of how they buy food. So schools, going to schools should feel like you're stepping every day into the 2030 that we need, and how you're taught is also really important so that you can shape your own learning rather than just being taught stuff that doesn't really seem to matter very much. There's a beautiful Woody Allen film called Stardust Memories, and it starts with Woody Allen. It's all filmed in black and white. It starts with Woody Allen sitting in a train, and he's looking around him at the people in the carriage that he's sitting in, and they're all actors chosen for these incredible, really miserable faces, you know, really depressed looking people. He's looking around in the carriage at the people around him, and then another train arrives next to them, which is full of really beautiful people having a party, and they're all drinking champagne. And then he looks back in his own carriage. One man just starts crying. And he looks back at the train over here, and this beautiful woman blows him a kiss across the, and he's and then his train starts to leave, and he's like, ah. And I think that for me is what this needs to feel like. The transition that needs to happen needs to feel like that train there. This is only going to work if we can make this joyful and celebratory and the best party. And if we imagine that we're going to create the scale of change that we need, and it will feel like a long walk home in the rain in a cold November day, that's just not going to do it. This has to be feel like an invitation to be at the best party that was ever had, and we can do that because that's what it would feel like. Because the only way that we will successfully find a way through it is if we are able to reimagine our food system, energy system, transport system, everything. And I think to live in a time when you can reimagine everything would be so exciting. Imagine if over the next 10 years, if in 10 years' time you were able to visit Paris, and all those things that you hate about Paris, it's smelly, the air's horrible, there's car noise all the time, all of that stuff wasn't there anymore. And you could see, and it smelt like spring, and people were living much, much happier lives, much less stressed lives. We could do that. There's no reason why that couldn't happen. All of the things that we know we need to do already work somewhere. We need to design the cities of the future that have the cycling infrastructure of Rotterdam, the car-free neighborhoods of Freiburg in Germany, the new local food networks that we see emerging in Liège, the economic model that underpins the city of Preston, the kind of feminization of politics that we see happening in Barcelona, the civil imagination offices that we see in Bologna. We know how to do all of this stuff. We just have to do it all in different places. And I think we are already seeing now a number of cities competing with each other to become the first city to get there. And that's the kind of spirit we need to be creating, I think. So the transition movement is something that we started in 2006 in my little town in the UK, a place called Totnes, which was an exploration of saying, clearly we need government to do a lot of stuff. We need individuals to do stuff. We need businesses to do stuff, universities to do stuff. But there's a piece of that jigsaw puzzle, which is what can we do as communities if we get together and we work together? What could we create? And no one had really explored that much before. So we started something, an experiment in my town, which you'll now find in 50 countries around the world, in thousands of communities. And the idea is really, we call it a movement of communities who are reimagining and rebuilding the world. Balancing those two things, the imagining and the building, is really, really important. And they set out to build the resilience of the economy of the place where they are, to put in place the new infrastructure that we will need for this new paradigm that we need to get to. So they create new local food systems, community energy companies, all kinds of local economic development projects, supporting each other to insulate their homes and reduce energy consumption. Training people to use bicycles. It's that piece of what we can do, and it's been running now for 15 years as a kind of self-organized international experiment. And from those learnings, there are so many things that we now know will work and can work in all kinds of different settings. We just need to do more of them. So somebody once called the transition movement hope with its sleeves rolled up, which I really liked. Hope comes not just from sitting around and hoping. Hope comes from doing something, and that giving you more confidence that more is possible. And I think for years, people imagined that you have people over here who don't know anything about climate change and aren't doing anything, people over here who really care about it and are doing loads, and all we need to do is give somebody a really miserable DVD and they will somehow magically jump from here to here. It's not like that. People take steps. So they get involved in one little project. Oh, that was really good fun. I know more people than I knew before. I'll take another step. Oh, this is really good. I've met so-and-so and they want to do that project too. Let's take another step. So we have to design those ways for people to step in. And sometimes people who are involved in very radical, confrontational kind of politics assume that kind of activism is the radical politics, and that work of working at the local economy scale, building from the local economy, is not so radical. I think they are both as radical as each other, because they're both about moving us towards a different future. We need a big, bold, beautiful no, and a big, bold, beautiful yes, working in solidarity with each other. Oh, that's a very difficult question, because they keep changing all the time, and new ones join and other ones leave. And I think the last was about 2,300 or something in 50 countries. There are 26 countries now that have what we call a national hub. So they have a national organization like Transition US, Transition France, which supports transition in that country. The beauty of it is it's very much a self-organizing network. It's really hard for me to know what its future is, because when we started it, we were trying to design something that would just work in my town. So the idea that 15 years later they would be in 50 countries, I mean, really? So I don't know. I would hope that in 10 years' time, we wouldn't need to talk about the transition movement anymore, because its work is to give people the confidence and the tools and the inspiration for this transition bit. So if in 10 years we haven't done anything, then it's kind of too late, really. We have this, what the IPCC call this small and rapidly closing window. But while we have a small and rapidly closing window, we need to do absolutely everything that we possibly can. So the transition movement is there to support that process. But yeah, hopefully in 10 years' time we won't need to talk about it anymore because we will have successfully made the transition. Yes, I mean, I could spend hours doing this, but I think someone who I would mention is someone called Mariame Kaba, who is a writer in America, who is a prison abolition activist. So she wrote a book called We Do This Till We Free Us, which is all about the movement, particularly among black communities in America, to get rid of prisons, to abolish prison. And that what if, I'm always really interested in what if questions that are ambitious on a scale that could be really transformative. So that question of what if there was no prison unlocks such an important conversation about, well, what would our education system look like? What would the way that the government allocates money look like? What would healthcare look like? How would we manage trauma differently in a society in order to get to a place where there was no prisons? How would policing work differently? And for me, the prison abolition movement is one of the great what-if questions of our time. And in her book, she says, we live in a system that has been locked into a false sense of inevitability. So we're in this system that just believes it can never change. But that's just a belief. We imagined prison as a thing. We can unimagine prison. We need to think about it differently. So her book, We Do This Till We Free Us, for me, is one of the most beautiful and passionate arguments for the power of good what-if questions and for ideas that can unlock really deep change. Okay. If I could be someone else, I think maybe because we are in Arles, and because I draw and I do printmaking, I would be Vincent van Gogh. I wouldn't want his life. I wouldn't want his trauma and his illness. But I see something in the work that he made, particularly his drawings, which moves me so much, can make me cry looking at his work sometimes, because he saw the world, he saw nature with an intensity that very few other people have. He lived in Arles, which at the time was a pretty horrible place, and he lived in this shitty little house round the corner from here. There was a 2-bedroom house that opposite a park that was used by alcoholics and prostitutes and sex workers. It was just a horrible place. And he painted that painting of that house as if it was like a revelation. He would draw the weeds growing around the back of the bathhouse as if they were the most beautiful thing he'd ever. He could see the almost divine beauty in whatever he looked at, and I feel like we need that ability now, and I feel like even though it destroyed him, those 2 or 3 years where he lived with that degree of intensity and he could see the kind of essence and the beauty of things is something just extraordinary. And I so if I could draw one picture with that kind of insight, I'd be very happy. Because if you don't love something, you're not going to protect it. if you can't see the beauty in something, then it's kind of disposable. If you can see the beauty in a load of weeds around the back of the bathhouse in Arles, if you can see the beauty in a factory with some grass growing around it, and you can draw it as if it was, I don't know, as if you were seeing heaven or something. I think if we could cultivate that within ourselves, and we could really experience the how extraordinarily beautiful the world around us is. You know, I came down here on the train from Paris through some of the most beautiful landscapes, and most people are just on the train looking at their phones. You know, it's like if we could really see how exquisitely beautiful the natural world is, then we would fight a lot harder to protect it.